You found your way here and clicked on this video. Thank you. Welcome to Sleepy Time Design, the home of gentle design trivia to go to sleep to. This is a quiet place for slowing down at the end of the day. You may let the sound play and rest as you are, without expectation, without worry. You may gently listen with peace, knowing that you are about to sink and relax into this subtle, sleepy story. Let us begin. Elements in space. In the stillness of a white room, objects find their places. Layout refers to how elements are arranged within a space. A chair rests near the window. A table stands against the wall. A lamp occupies the corner where two walls meet. These placements are not accidental, though they may appear unconsidered. Each position represents a choice, a decision about where something belongs in relation to everything else. The chair near the window does not exist in isolation. Composition describes how those elements relate to one another. It exists in relation to the table against the wall, to the lamp in the corner, to the empty space that surrounds all three. These relationships form a web of connections, each object pulling at the others through invisible threads of proximity, distance, alignment, and contrast. The chair is closer to the window than to the table. The lamp is smaller than both. The table's edge runs parallel to the wall but perpendicular to the line between chair and lamp. Structure emerges, whether intended or not. Every layout creates a visual structure. The placement of chair, table, and lamp creates an invisible architecture within the room, a framework that organizes the space even without walls or barriers. This structure might form a triangle, the three objects marking points that the eye connects. It might create a line, if the objects align. It might establish zones, with the window area feeling distinct from the wall area. Whatever forms, the structure becomes the underlying geometry that holds the composition together. Most of the time, this architecture operates beneath conscious awareness. Structure can exist even when it is not noticed. A person enters the white room and notices the chair, the table, the lamp, but rarely considers the triangular relationship they form or the way their placement divides the room into distinct regions. The structure does its work invisibly, organizing perception without announcement. The eye travels from chair to lamp to table, following a path the structure suggests without recognizing the guidance. The white room contains more than chair, table, and lamp. Empty space is part of the composition. It contains the floor between them, the air around them, the wall behind them. This emptiness is not absence, but presence, an active participant in the arrangement. The space between chair and table is as meaningful as the objects themselves, determining how separate or connected they feel. The empty center of the room creates a clearing, a void that gives the other elements room to exist without crowding. Around each object, an envelope of emptiness exists. Space can give elements room to breathe. The chair near the window has space around it, a buffer zone where nothing else intrudes. This envelope lets the chair be fully itself, not pressed against or merged with other objects. The breathing room creates clarity, making each element legible and distinct. When items crowd together, they begin to blur into clusters where individual identity diminishes. But with space between them, each retains its separateness. In the white room, the floor between chair and table forms a patch of something particular. Negative space is the area around and between elements. The wall behind the table, empty of decoration, creates a field of this territory. The air surrounding the lamp, unoccupied by anything else, constitutes the same phenomenon. These areas are called negative, not because they lack value, but because they lack objects, defining themselves through what they are not rather than what they are. There is a hush in empty areas, a stillness where nothing competes for attention. Negative space can feel quiet. The large stretch of bare floor in the white room carries a sense of peace, its emptiness offering a place for the eye to rest without encountering new information. Unlike the chair, which must be processed and understood, the empty floor simply exists as openness, requiring no interpretation. Imagine the white room filled with furniture chairs against every wall, tables of various heights scattered throughout, lamps on every surface, shelves covering the walls, objects on every shelf. Crowded layouts often feel busy. The space becomes dense with things, each item competing for attention. The eye moves from chair to table, to lamp to shelf without finding a place to rest. Every glance encounters something new to process, some new detail to absorb. This crowding creates a sense of busyness, of activity and energy that can feel exciting or overwhelming depending on context and tolerance. Return the white room to its original state: chair, table, lamp, and vast empty floor between them. Open layouts often feel calm. The openness creates an entirely different atmosphere. The eye finds the chair, registers it, then travels across empty space to discover the table. A pause. Then movement to the lamp in the corner. Between each point of interest, a stretch of nothingness where no demands are made. This openness allows breathing, both literal and visual. The space feels inhabitable rather than cluttered, welcoming rather than overwhelming. Weight and equilibrium. Visual weight is an invisible force, but it pulls at perception nonetheless. Balance describes how visual weight is distributed. In the white room, if all furniture clusters in one corner, that corner becomes heavy while the rest of the room feels light, even empty. The weight pulls the eye toward the cluster, making that area feel dense and significant, while the empty areas fade into background. This distribution of weight can tip a composition in one direction or achieve some kind of equilibrium. A seesaw with all weight on one end tips dramatically. A seesaw with equal weight on both ends stays level. Visual arrangements operate similarly, though the mathematics are less precise. A composition might place a large, dark shape on the left and several smaller light shapes on the right, the multiple small weights collectively balancing the single large weight. Imagine the white room rearranged, the table centered on one wall, a lamp at each end of the table, a chair on either side. Balance can be symmetrical. The room now mirrors itself across a central axis running from the door to the window. Whatever appears on the left has a matching element on the right. This symmetry creates a particular kind of balance, one based on equivalence and mirroring. Symmetrical balance is the balance of formal gardens, of classical architecture, of faces and butterflies. It feels deliberate and orderly, its predictability creating a sense of stability. The white room shifts again. The table moves to the left side, larger and darker than before. Balance can also be asymmetrical. On the right side, the two chairs appear, smaller and lighter in color, positioned at different heights. The lamp, tall and slender, stands in the far right corner. Nothing mirrors, yet somehow the composition feels balanced. The large, dark table on the left finds its counterweight in the multiple lighter elements on the right. The centered table, with its flanking lamps and chairs, creates an impression of rootedness, of things settled into their proper places. Symmetry often feels stable. The mirroring suggests permanence, as though the arrangement has existed this way for a long time and will continue without change. Symmetry in architecture gives buildings their monumental quality, the matched wings of a palace, the identical towers of a cathedral, the balanced facade of a courthouse. These structures communicate authority partly through their symmetrical stability. The table and chairs in their unmatched arrangement achieve equilibrium, despite their lack of mirroring. Asymmetry can still feel balanced. The composition does not tip or lean, but rather distributes its weight in a way that feels resolved, complete. This is the more sophisticated balance, the kind that requires adjustment and fine-tuning rather than simple duplication. An asymmetrical balance feels active rather than static, as though forces are continuously working to maintain equilibrium rather than resting in predetermined positions. In the White Room, the table exerts more visual pull than the lamp, simply because it occupies more space. Visual weight is influenced by size. The larger an object, the more it attracts attention, the heavier it feels in the composition. This relationship between size and weight seems obvious, yet it operates powerfully in every visual arrangement. A poster with one large headline and several small paragraphs places most of its weight in the headline, which dominates the composition. Size creates hierarchy naturally, making certain elements primary and others secondary. The eye goes first to what is largest, registering size as importance, as something that demands attention by virtue of claiming more territory. Imagine the White Room with its furniture now painted, the table a deep burgundy, almost black in its darkness. Color can affect visual weight. The chairs a pale cream, barely distinguishable from the white walls. The lamp in dark bronze. The table, already large, becomes heavier still with its dark color, seeming to sink into the floor with additional gravity. The pale chairs become lighter, almost weightless, floating like feathers. Place a single black lamp in the White Room, surrounded by pale furniture and walls. Contrast can increase visual weight. The lamp, despite being the smallest object, suddenly carries enormous weight. The stark contrast between its darkness and the surrounding lightness makes it pop from the background, claiming attention disproportionate to its size. High contrast creates visual weight by making elements stand out sharply from their surroundings. A black dot on a white page weighs more than a gray dot on the same page, not because it is larger, but because it contrasts more dramatically with the background. The contrast acts as an amplifier, increasing the pull of whatever contrasts. The same lamp placed in the center of the White Room feels different than when positioned in the corner. Position within a layout matters. Centered, it becomes a focal point, an anchor around which everything else orbits. In the corner, it becomes peripheral, a supporting element rather than a protagonist. Position affects importance, attention, and meaning. Elements at the top of a composition often register as more important than those at the bottom, perhaps because reading habits train the eye to start at the top. The table, when positioned in the middle of the White Room, takes on a gravitational quality, as though it has weight that extends beyond its physical mass. Elements near the center often feel anchored. The center is the most stable position in any composition, the point of equilibrium where forces balance. Elements placed there feel settled, established, immovable. This centrality creates a sense of importance and permanence. A poster, with its main image centered, communicates that this image is the essential content, the core around which everything else organizes. The center is where the composition holds its breath, where energy gathers rather than disperses. Objects place their benefit from this concentration, gaining weight and significance through position alone. The anchor point of a composition rarely drifts far from center, even in asymmetrical arrangements, because the center exerts such strong organizational pull. The room settles into its arrangement, each element finding its place in the invisible calculus of weight and position, the balance emerging from relationships rather than rules, the equilibrium felt rather than measured. Order and structure. In this white room, if the left edge of the table aligns with the left edge of the chair, something clicks into place. Alignment creates order. The two separate objects suddenly share a relationship, an invisible line connecting them. This line, though unseen, organizes the space, creating structure from what might otherwise feel random. When multiple elements align along the same edge or axis, they form a stronger bond, a group held together by their shared positioning. 3 pictures hang on the wall of the white room, their top edges forming a perfect horizontal line. Aligned elements feel connected. Though the pictures show different subjects and hang in different positions, the alignment suggests they form a set, a collection meant to be viewed together. The shared horizontal line creates a relationship stronger than proximity alone would establish. The connection created by alignment is subtle but powerful. Elements that align seem to know about each other, to be in conversation across whatever space separates them. The 3 pictures on the wall shift slightly, one hanging a 1/4 inch higher than the others. Misalignment draws attention. The eye, having established the expectation of alignment, immediately notices the deviation. The misaligned picture becomes a focal point, not because of its content, but because of its broken relationship with the others. This quality makes misalignment useful when something needs to stand out, when breaking the pattern serves a purpose. But unintentional misalignment simply feels wrong, creating visual discomfort without payoff. The eye tries to correct the misalignment mentally, wishing the deviant element would slide into proper position. A series of thin lines appears on the floor of the white room, dividing it into equal squares. Grids help organize space. Suddenly, the placement of furniture has reference points. The table could align with one set of lines, the chairs with another, the lamp positioned where lines intersect. The grid provides scaffolding, a framework that makes decisions easier by offering a limited set of positions where elements might sit. The lines on the floor fade away, yet the furniture remains arranged according to their logic. Grids do not need to be visible to work. The structure persists even after the explicit markers disappear, continuing to organize the space through the relationships it established. A poster designed on a grid retains that grid's influence even when printed without any visible lines. The alignment and spacing of elements reveal the underlying structure, the ghost of the grid still shaping the composition. A well-designed grid becomes invisible in the final work, its presence felt as overall coherence rather than seen as literal lines. The white room's furniture sits in positions that, though apparently casual, follow relationships that become clear on examination. Many layouts follow invisible guides. The chair's placement respects an invisible line extending from the window's edge. The table aligns with an imaginary axis running through the room's center. The lamp positions itself at a distance from the wall that echoes the distance between other elements. These guides are never drawn, never explicitly marked, yet they govern the arrangement as surely as visible lines would. A border of empty floor surrounds the furniture arrangement in the white room, a strip where no objects intrude. Margins create boundaries. This empty perimeter defines where the composition begins, separating it from the space beyond. The margin frames the arrangement, creating a buffer zone between content and edge. A page with wide margins around its text creates breathing room, the white space announcing that the text occupies a defined territory within the larger sheet. Margins can be symmetrical, the same width on all sides, or varied, with different amounts of space at top, bottom, and sides. But in all cases, margins perform the essential function of creating a boundary, establishing where the composition lives and where it does not. The empty border around the white room's furniture arrangement measures the same width on all four sides. Consistent margins feel steady. The uniform spacing creates a stable frame, a predictable boundary that holds the composition with even pressure. There is something reassuring about this consistency, a sense that the composition has found its proper container. The border around the furniture arrangement narrows on one side and widens on the others, the asymmetry creating a subtle tension. Uneven margins can feel unsettled. The composition appears to drift toward the narrow margin, as though gravity pulls it off-center. The eye tries to compensate for this imbalance, mentally repositioning the content to achieve centeredness that doesn't exist. Sometimes, uneven margins serve a purpose. A poster might use a narrow top margin and wide bottom margin to create a grounded feeling, the extra space below suggesting weight and stability. But when margins vary without clear intention, the result feels accidental, as though someone miscalculated. The composition loses the steadying effect of consistent boundaries, instead floating uncertainly within its space, untethered from a reliable frame. Remove all structure from the white room, scatter furniture randomly, ignore alignment, abandon any sense of zones or relationships. Structure supports clarity. The chaos makes it difficult to understand the space, to know where to look or how elements relate. The eye wanders without guidance, finding no path, no hierarchy, no organizing principle. Replace the structure, arrange furniture in logical groupings, create alignment, establish clear relationships, and suddenly the room makes sense. The same elements, structured, become comprehensible. Structure is the difference between chaos and order, between confusion and understanding. It provides the framework that makes composition legible, the underlying architecture that lets viewers navigate content without getting lost. The white room settles back into its organized state, each element finding its position along invisible guides, margins holding everything within defined boundaries, alignment creating connections across distance. The structure hums quietly beneath the surface, doing its work without fanfare, transforming scattered objects into a coherent whole. Hierarchy and rest. In the white room, the large table dominates, claiming attention before the smaller chair or lamp register. Hierarchy guides where the eye goes first. Not all elements carry equal importance, and hierarchy makes these differences visible. The most important element appears first, largest or brightest, or most contrasted, announcing itself as the entry point into the composition. Secondary elements wait their turn, revealing themselves after the primary element has been processed. A poster establishes hierarchy through size, making the headline enormous and body text small, ensuring viewers read the headline before anything else. The eye follows this hierarchy naturally, moving from primary to secondary to tertiary elements in the sequence the composition suggests. Without hierarchy, everything competes equally, creating the visual noise of democracy where nothing stands out. With hierarchy, The composition tells a story in a particular order. The table, being the largest object in the white room, naturally draws attention first. Size is one way hierarchy is created. Larger elements claim more visual territory and thus more attention, establishing themselves as primary simply through their scale. A headline twice the size of body text becomes the headline not just through content, but through scale. The relationship is nearly universal. Bigger means more important in the visual language of composition. This makes size the most straightforward tool for creating hierarchy, requiring no special techniques or subtle adjustments. Simply make something larger and it rises in the hierarchy. Make something smaller and it recedes. A small black dot appears on the white wall of the room, drawing attention despite its tiny size. Contrast can also create hierarchy. The dot's stark difference from its surroundings makes it visible, important, impossible to ignore. An element doesn't need to be large to claim attention if it contrasts sufficiently with its context. Contrast creates hierarchy by making certain elements pop from their surroundings, separating them visually from everything else. Two identical lamps appear in the white room, one in the center, one in a corner. Placement affects importance. The centered lamp feels more significant despite being identical to its counterpart, its position conferring status. Elements placed in prominent positions, center, top, or along the primary axis, register as more important than those relegated to margins or corners. A magazine cover places its main feature in the upper center, while smaller stories scatter around the periphery. The placement alone communicates the relative importance of each piece, regardless of actual content. Through placement alone, a composition can establish hierarchy without varying size, color, or any other attribute. The word sale appears 3 times on a poster in the white room, in the same size and color, while other words appear only once. Repetition reinforces hierarchy. The repeated word gains importance through insistence, its recurrence making it more memorable than single-instance elements. Repetition works partly through simple exposure. The more often something appears, the more likely it is to be remembered, but also through the suggestion that anything repeated must be important. Why else would it deserve multiple appearances? The white room fills with objects, each brightly colored and demanding attention. Too many focal points can feel confusing. The eye darts from one object to another, unable to settle, unsure where to begin or what matters most. When everything shouts for attention, nothing gets heard clearly. A poster with 5 different elements, all competing for primacy through size, color, and contrast, creates decision paralysis in the viewer. Which element should be read first? Which is most important? The lack of clear hierarchy forces the viewer to make these decisions, adding cognitive load and reducing comprehension. Focal points work best in limited numbers, one primary focus, perhaps a secondary and tertiary focus, but rarely more. Too many focal points transform into no focal points, the competition for attention canceling itself out. The white room simplifies. One red chair, everything else white. One clear focal point often feels restful. The eye finds the chair immediately, settles there, and can then explore the rest of the space from this stable anchor point. There is no confusion about where to look first, no competition for attention, just a clear entry point into the composition. Between the furniture groupings in the white room, stretches of empty floor provide breaks in the visual information. Visual pauses help the eye rest. These pauses work like paragraph breaks in text, giving the viewer a moment to absorb what they've seen before moving to the next element. Without pauses, Information flows continuously, demanding constant processing without relief. A poster with dense text, broken by occasional images or white space areas, gives the eye places to rest between reading sessions. These pauses are not empty space in the negative sense, but rather intentional rest stops, moments of low information density that make the high-density areas sustainable. A wide gap appears between two furniture groups in the white room. Pauses can be created with space. The empty distance between groups serves as a visual rest, a zone where nothing demands attention. The space separates the groups both physically and perceptually, giving each its own territory while providing breathing room between them. A magazine layout with generous spacing between articles creates similar pauses, the white space announcing transitions and giving readers a moment to finish processing one piece before beginning another. One corner of the white room contains a single smooth white cube, its plainness contrasting with the detailed furniture elsewhere. Pauses can be created with simplicity. The cube provides visual rest, not through absence, but through reduction. Fewer details to process, simpler forms to understand. A poster with one section of plain color among areas of complex imagery creates a pause through simplification rather than emptiness. A website with a minimalist section between information-dense sections gives the eye a break through reduced complexity. The simple areas process quickly, requiring less cognitive effort than complex areas, effectively serving as pauses even though they contain content. The pause comes not from nothing being there, but from less being there, from visual information reduced to its simplest form. The white room breathes with these pauses, its rhythms of density and openness creating a comfortable flow, hierarchy guiding attention through a clear sequence, focal points providing destinations, and empty spaces offering rest between journeys. Proximity and pattern. In the room, 3 small objects sit close to each other, separate from everything else. Proximity groups related elements together. The 3 objects form a cluster, perceived as a set despite being individual items. Their closeness suggests relationship, implying they belong together more than they belong with distant objects. A business card with contact information grouped tightly together makes that information read as a unit, distinct from the logo and name elsewhere on the card. A web page with related links clustered close creates a navigation group, the proximity signaling that these links connect to similar content. The eye naturally groups nearby elements, assuming that things placed together are meant to be understood together. This principle requires no labels or explicit connections. Proximity itself communicates relationship. 2 chairs in the white room sit side by side, their arms nearly touching. Elements placed close feel connected. The chairs seem to be in conversation, partners in some way, related by their proximity. Move them apart, and the relationship weakens, the suggestion of connection fading with increased distance. A poster with a headline directly above a paragraph makes the 2 feel connected, the headline clearly labeling its corresponding text. Increase the space between headline and paragraph, and the connection becomes less obvious, the relationship less certain. Place another element in the space between them, and the connection may break entirely, the intervening element disrupting the proximity that suggested relationship. Connection through closeness is a fundamental principle of perception, so fundamental that it operates automatically, requiring no conscious thought. The chair near the window sits far from the table against the opposite wall. Distant elements feel separate. The distance between them creates independence. each element occupying its own territory without obvious connection to the other. They coexist in the same room, but don't feel related, don't seem to be part of the same group. Imagine the white room with 20 small objects scattered randomly across the floor. Grouping reduces visual effort. Each object must be processed individually, its position relative to all others considered, the overall pattern parsed from 20 separate pieces of information. The cognitive load is high, the visual effort substantial. Now imagine the same 20 objects arranged in 4 groups of 5, each group clustered tightly. Suddenly, there are 4 things to process instead of 20. The groups functioning as units. The effort required drops dramatically. The mind naturally seeks to reduce complexity by grouping, so compositions that provide clear groupings work with perception rather than against it, making processing easier and faster. The furniture in the white room maintains equal distances between pieces, each gap matching the others. Consistent spacing supports cohesion. The regular intervals create rhythm, a pattern that suggests intentionality and unity. The composition feels designed, the even spacing indicating that someone considered the relationships carefully. Most gaps in the white room measure the same, but one gap is much wider than the others. Irregular spacing draws attention. The deviation breaks the pattern, creating a visual surprise that captures the eye. The inconsistency suggests something intentional, some reason for the different spacing. A poster with uniform spacing throughout, except for one section with compressed spacing, draws attention to that exception. The eye notices the break in pattern and wonders about its significance. Irregular spacing can emphasize, separate, or create hierarchy, but it always creates interest. The break in pattern signals something different here, alerting the viewer to pay special attention. Used intentionally, irregular spacing becomes a tool for emphasis. Used accidentally, it simply feels wrong, disrupting the visual rhythm without purpose. 5 identical lamps appear in the white room, arranged in a row. Patterns emerge through repetition. The repeated lamp creates a pattern, a visual rhythm that the eye can follow. The pattern transforms 5 individual objects into a unified element, a sequence rather than separate items. A poster with repeated shapes or colors creates a pattern that ties the composition together, the recurrence establishing visual connections across space. Patterns provide structure, rhythm, and unity, turning individual elements into systems. The mind recognizes patterns automatically, finding comfort in their predictability and using them to organize information efficiently. The row of lamps in the white room creates a path, each lamp a stepping stone for the eye. Patterns help the eye move gently. The repeated elements provide a smooth trajectory, the eye gliding from one instance to the next without jarring transitions. The pattern provides expectations. The eye anticipates the next repetition and finds it where predicted, the confirmation creating a satisfying sense of continuity. The lamps alternate. Large, small, large, small, large, small. Rhythm can exist visually. Though silent and static, the alternation creates a beat, a tempo felt through the eyes rather than heard through the ears. The pattern of large and small establishes a 1-to-2 rhythm, a visual pulse. A poster with alternating blocks of text and image creates a similar rhythm, the eye bouncing between different types of content in a regular pattern. Visual rhythm can be regular like a metronome or varied like jazz, but in all cases it creates movement through time as the eye progresses through the composition. The rhythm affects pacing, determining whether the visual journey feels quick or leisurely, energetic or calm. The lamps now appear with long stretches of empty floor between them. Slow rhythms feel calmer. The extended intervals between repetitions create a leisurely pace, giving the eye plenty of time to rest between beats. Fast rhythms energize, slow rhythms soothe. The tempo affects the overall tone of the composition, with slower rhythms creating space for reflection and contemplation. The pauses between beats become as important as the beats themselves. The silence between notes allowing the rhythm to breathe. The white room settles into its patterns, clusters forming relationships, spacing creating rhythm, repetition establishing familiar paths that the eye follows with ease. A series of objects in the white room arranges itself in a diagonal line from lower left to upper right. Direction influences how the eye travels. The arrangement creates a trajectory, a path that pulls the eye along its course. The diagonal suggests movement, energy, a journey from starting point to destination. A poster with elements arranged along an implied diagonal creates visual energy, the composition feeling dynamic rather than static. A website with content flowing in a particular direction down the page, across columns, channels attention along intended paths. The direction of arrangement affects how content is encountered, determining the sequence in which elements register and the momentum with which the eye moves through the composition. Horizontal arrangements feel stable and calm. Vertical arrangements feel active and strong. Diagonal arrangements feel dynamic and energetic. The direction chosen shapes the overall character of the composition. A thin wire stretches across the room from one corner to another. Lines can guide attention. The eye follows the wire naturally, tracing its path from beginning to end. Lines create the strongest directional force in composition, their trajectory explicitly indicating where attention should flow. A poster with a graphic line element pulls the eye along its path, connecting disparate elements or leading to a specific destination. Even implied lines, alignments of elements that suggest but don't explicitly draw a line guide, attention along their trajectory. The eye wants to follow lines, to complete their paths, to see where they lead. This tendency makes lines powerful tools for directing attention through a composition. A long shelf runs along the white room's wall, its horizontal edge creating a strong line. Horizontal lines often feel stable. The horizon itself is horizontal, that fundamental divider between earth and sky that represents rest and equilibrium. Horizontal lines in composition inherit this quality, creating a sense of calm and groundedness. A tall column stands in the white room, its vertical edge a powerful line. Vertical lines often feel strong. They defy gravity, reaching upward, suggesting growth and aspiration. Trees grow vertically. Buildings rise vertically. Vertical lines in composition carry these associations, creating a sense of strength and stability different from horizontal lines. A poster with strong vertical elements feels dynamic while still maintaining structure, the verticals supporting content like pillars. Vertical arrangements have directionality without the dynamism of diagonals, creating movement that feels controlled and purposeful. The strength of vertical lines comes from their resistance to falling, their upward thrust suggesting solidity and permanence. A ladder leans against the wall in the white room, its diagonal edge creating tension. Diagonal lines often feel dynamic. Unlike horizontal and vertical lines, which align with stable axes, Diagonals exist in perpetual imbalance, suggesting movement and energy. A falling object traces a diagonal path. A climbing object follows a diagonal trajectory. Diagonal lines in composition carry this sense of motion, creating visual energy that horizontal and vertical lines lack. A vine grows across the room's window, its gentle curves creating flowing lines. Curved lines feel softer. Unlike the hardness of straight lines with their sharp trajectories, curves bend gradually, creating gentler paths for the eye to follow. A poster with curving elements feels organic, flowing, less rigid than one built from straight lines alone. Curves suggest nature, the curve of a river, the arc of a branch, the spiral of a shell. They feel approachable rather than severe, inviting rather than forbidding. A website with rounded corners and curving transitions feels more welcoming than one with sharp angles and straight edges. The softness of curves reduces visual aggression, creating compositions that feel gentle and harmonious. The furniture in the white room arranges itself in a gentle arc, the curve so slight it's barely noticeable. Flow can be subtle. The eye moves through the composition along this gentle curve without consciously recognizing the path it follows. The flow guides without announcing itself, creating movement that feels natural rather than directed. All elements in the white room remain perfectly still. Movement does not require animation. Yet the eye moves through the space, traveling from object to object, following paths suggested by arrangement and relationship. Static compositions create movement through the trajectory of attention, the sequence in which elements register, the paths the eye follows. A poster creates movement through the arrangement of elements that lead from one to another, implying a reading order, establishing flow. A painting creates movement through compositional lines and value patterns that guide the eye on journeys across the surface. The movement exists in the viewing experience, not in the viewed objects. The composition moves the eye rather than moving itself, creating kinetic experience from static elements. The route through the white room's furniture meanders gently, suggesting rather than demanding a particular journey. Visual paths can be quiet. The eye follows the suggested route without being pushed, moving through the composition in a way that feels chosen rather than required. Quiet paths respect viewer agency, offering guidance while leaving room for exploration. 20 objects scatter randomly across the white room's floor. The eye naturally seeks order. Even in chaos, the mind searches for patterns, tries to group nearby elements, attempts to impose structure on randomness. This tendency toward organization means that viewers will find order in compositions whether it was intentionally designed or not. The eye connects aligned elements, groups proximate objects, completes implied shapes. A poster with randomly scattered elements will have false patterns perceived within it, the mind's organizational drive creating structures from coincidental relationships. This natural drive toward order makes design structure easier to process. The composition provides the organization the eye seeks anyway, reducing the effort required. Structure works with perception rather than against it. The white room arranges itself into flowing paths, lines guiding attention through space, curves softening the journey, direction channeling movement, the eye traveling through stillness and finding motion in arrangement, contrast, and connection. A black cube sits next to a white cube in the white room. Contrast separates elements. The stark difference in value makes the two cubes distinct, clearly separate despite touching. Without contrast, elements blur together, boundaries becoming unclear. A poster with high contrast between text and background makes the text pop forward, clearly separated from its surroundings. A painting with strong value contrast creates distinct forms, each element maintaining its identity. Contrast is the tool that creates separation, that establishes boundaries, that makes elements legible against their contexts. The greater the contrast, the stronger the separation, the clearer the distinction between one element and another. Low contrast creates subtle separation, or even merging, elements bleeding into each other. High contrast creates sharp separation, elements maintaining clear boundaries and distinct identities. The black cube fades to dark gray, the white cube to light gray. Low contrast feels gentle. The reduced difference between elements creates soft transitions, boundaries that exist but don't shout. A poster with low contrast between elements feels subtle, sophisticated, quiet. The gentleness requires closer attention. Elements don't immediately jump forward, instead, revealing themselves gradually. A website with muted colors and subtle contrast feels calm, even meditative. The lack of sharp distinctions creating visual peace. Low contrast works well for compositions meant to soothe, to create elegance, to avoid visual aggression. The gentleness comes at a cost. Legibility decreases as contrast decreases, so low contrast must be balanced against readability. But when appropriate, low contrast creates a quality of refinement and subtlety. The cube returns to pure black, its neighbor to brilliant white. High contrast feels alerting. The sharp difference demands attention, the stark boundary creating visual energy that cannot be ignored. A poster with high contrast between elements feels bold, dramatic, immediate. High contrast compositions announce themselves, requiring no effort to see, impossible to overlook. A website with strong contrast feels energetic, sometimes even aggressive, the sharp distinctions creating visual excitement. High contrast serves well for compositions that need to capture attention quickly, that compete in busy environments, that must communicate urgency. The alertness can become tiring. High contrast throughout exhausts the eye, every boundary demanding equal attention. But used strategically, high contrast creates emphasis and draws attention powerfully. A tiny cube appears next to an enormous cube in the white room, both the same color. Contrast can be created with size. The dramatic difference in scale makes the two distinct despite their color similarity. Size contrast creates visual interest and hierarchy, the large element dominating while the small element provides counterpoint. A poster with one large image and several tiny images creates contrast through scale alone, no color or value difference needed. A website with varied text sizes creates hierarchy and rhythm through size, contrast, headings jumping forward while body text recedes. Size contrast is perhaps the most fundamental type of contrast, working across all visual media and requiring no special techniques. Simply make elements different sizes and contrast emerges. The difference in scale creating separation and relationship simultaneously. The cubes become the same size but different colors, one brilliant red, one cool blue. Contrast can be created with color. The hue difference makes them distinct, each color vibrating against the other. Color contrast can be subtle, analogous colors, creating gentle distinction, or dramatic complementary colors, creating maximum separation. A poster with varied colors creates visual interest and organization, different colors defining different sections or types of information. A website with color-coded elements uses color contrast to create categories and hierarchies, related items sharing colors, while unrelated items diverge. Color contrast works emotionally as well as visually. Warm colors advance, cool colors recede, creating depth through hue alone. The emotional associations of different colors add meaning to the contrast beyond simple separation. A single cube sits in an enormous white room, surrounded by vast emptiness. Contrast can be created with space. The cube contrasts sharply with the empty space around it, the filled area versus the void, creating dramatic separation. A poster with one small element in a field of white space creates contrast through spatial relationship, the element standing out not because of its color or size, but because of the emptiness surrounding it. A website with generous white space around key elements creates contrast through spatial isolation, the surrounded elements feeling important and emphasized. Space-based contrast is quiet but powerful, the emptiness amplifying whatever appears within it. The contrast comes not from difference between elements, but from the relationship between element and void. Every surface in the white room alternates between pure black and pure white in a chaotic pattern. Too much contrast can feel tiring. The constant shifting between extremes demands continual adjustment, the eye working hard to process the sharp boundaries everywhere. High contrast throughout a composition eliminates rest, every edge a sharp division requiring attention. A poster with maximum contrast in every element becomes exhausting to view, the visual noise overwhelming any attempt at hierarchy. Contrast works best when varied areas of high contrast for emphasis, areas of low contrast for rest. The alternation between sharp and gentle creates rhythm and allows the eye to recover between moments of high contrast. Relentless contrast eliminates this breathing room, making sustained viewing uncomfortable. All elements in the white room fade to similar middle grays, differences barely perceptible. Too little contrast can feel flat. The lack of distinction makes elements blur together, boundaries becoming unclear, hierarchy disappearing. A poster with insufficient contrast becomes difficult to read, text melting into background, images losing definition. Low contrast creates sophistication and subtlety, but too low eliminates legibility and creates confusion. The flatness comes from lack of depth. Contrast creates the illusion of layers, of foreground and background, of near and far. Without sufficient contrast, everything occupies the same plane, the composition becoming a flat field where nothing stands out, nothing recedes, nothing breathes. The white room contains one large object and three small objects arranged at a distance. Balance comes from relationships. The single large object balances the three small objects, not through any quality inherent in the objects themselves, but through their relationship, their sizes relative to each other, their positions, their distances. Change any one of these factors, and the balance shifts. A poster achieves balance through the interaction of all its elements, each one affecting how every other is perceived. The balance exists between elements, in the space of relationship rather than in individual items. This relational quality means balance must be considered holistically optimizing. Individual elements means nothing if their relationships create imbalance. The composition works as a system, balance emerging from the totality of relationships. The large object in the white room moves to a new position. Relationships matter more than individual parts. Though the object itself hasn't changed, same size, same color, same shape, its meaning and the composition transforms completely. Previously, it balanced the three small objects. Now it creates imbalance, the composition tipping toward one side. A beautiful image becomes less effective if poorly placed. Perfect typography becomes unreadable if surrounded by chaos. Every element exists within context, its effectiveness determined by relationships with other elements. A poster's success depends not on having perfect individual pieces, but on how those pieces interact and relate. The whole emerges from relationships between parts, making those relationships the true substance of composition. The white room settles back into equilibrium, contrast defining boundaries, relationships creating balance, the interplay of similarity and difference giving the space its character and coherence. Boundaries and depth. A window frame appears in the white room, creating a rectangle that isolates one section of space. Framing draws attention inward. The frame creates boundaries that contain attention, directing focus toward what appears within rather than beyond. A poster with a border frame focuses attention on the framed content, the boundary creating a container that holds the eye. A photograph with strong foreground elements framing the subject draws attention to the center, the frame directing and concentrating focus. A website with content contained within visible panels creates frames that organize information and direct attention. The frame acts as a spotlight, announcing, "Look here," without words. The inward pull comes from the boundary's definition by marking where attention should not go. The frame clarifies where it should go, creating concentrated focus within the bounded area. The window frame disappears, but four objects in the white room mark its corners. Frames can be literal or implied. Though no physical frame exists, the four corner objects suggest a rectangle, creating an implied frame that functions similarly to a visible one. The eye completes the missing lines, imagining the boundary. A poster without a drawn border can still create framing through the arrangement of elements that suggest enclosure. A photograph creates implied frames through compositional elements that surround the subject without literally encircling it. A website creates implied frames through the grouping of elements and use of white space that suggests boundaries without drawing them. Implied frames feel less rigid than literal ones, their suggestion rather than statement, creating softer containment. But both types function similarly, creating boundaries that focus and direct attention. A line appears on the white room's floor, dividing it into two distinct zones. Borders define space. The line creates territory, establishing that one side differs from the other. Borders separate, organize, and contain, creating clarity about where things belong. A poster with borders around different sections organizes content into clear territories, each border marking a distinct area. A website with rules or lines separating content blocks creates clear divisions, helping users understand organization. Borders can be thick or thin, solid or dashed, colored or neutral, but they all perform the same essential function: marking boundaries, defining territories, separating one zone from another. The definition creates order, transforming ambiguous space into organized regions with clear identities and purposes. The line on the white room's floor becomes a gradual shift from light gray to dark gray, the boundary unclear. Soft boundaries feel open. The gradual transition creates permeability, suggesting that the boundary can be crossed, that the zones connect rather than strictly separate. A poster with soft gradients between sections creates flowing transitions, the boundaries present but welcoming. A website with subtle shadows or gentle color shifts between areas creates soft boundaries that organize without rigidly dividing. The openness comes from ambiguity. Soft boundaries exist in a range rather than at a point, their imprecision creating flexibility. They suggest zones that blend at their edges, territories that overlap rather than abut. The softness reduces the rigidity of organization, making the structure feel more organic and less mechanical. The gradual shift becomes a sharp black line, the boundary unmistakable. Hard boundaries feel contained. The sharp division creates clear separation, zones that exist independently without bleeding into each other. A poster with strong rules between sections creates distinct compartments, each area clearly delineated. A website with solid borders and clear background changes between sections, creates firm territories that don't blur together. Hard boundaries create order and clarity, making organization explicit and unambiguous. The containment can feel restrictive. Hard boundaries prevent flow, stop movement at their edges, but it also creates security, each zone protected within its defined limits. The hardness communicates definition and precision, structure that cannot be mistaken or ignored. In the white room, a translucent curtain hangs between the viewer and the furniture. Layers create depth. The curtain occupies the foreground, the furniture the background, the space between suggesting distance. This layering transforms flat space into dimensional space, creating the illusion of near and far. A poster with overlapping elements creates depth, some shapes appearing in front of others. A website with cards that cast shadows on the background creates layering, the shadows suggesting that cards hover above the page surface. Layering works through overlap and visual cues like size, clarity, and contrast. Foreground elements appear larger, sharper, and more contrasted than background elements. The depth created by layering adds visual interest and can guide attention from front to back, creating a journey through dimensional space. A chair in the white room partially obscures the table behind it. Overlapping elements suggest distance. The partial occlusion clearly indicates spatial relationship. The chair must be closer than the table because it blocks the view of it. This simple principle creates depth more powerfully than almost any other technique. A poster with one shape overlapping another immediately creates foreground and background, the overlapping shape reading as closer. A collage with overlapping images creates complex spatial relationships, each overlap establishing a hierarchical layer. A website with overlapping elements creates visual depth that makes the flat screen feel dimensional. The occlusion mimics real-world experience, where closer objects block views of farther ones, making the illusion of depth feel natural and believable. The white room's layered space curtain, furniture, wall creates a sense of dimension. Depth can feel calming. The suggestion of space creates breathing room, implying that the composition extends beyond its surface. A poster with dimensional depth feels less claustrophobic than a flat one, the implied space providing visual relief. A website with layering and depth cues feels more spacious than one where all elements exist on a single plane. The calming quality comes partly from the suggestion of real space-dimensional compositions, feel more like physical environments than flat ones do. They provide places for the eye to move into rather than just across. The depth creates escape, suggesting that if the surface feels crowded, there's always another layer to retreat into. This dimensional breathing room makes compositions feel more inhabitable and less oppressive. The curtain becomes barely translucent, the layering subtle. Depth does not need to be dramatic. Even slight suggestions of layering create dimensional effects. The subtle cues enough to transform flat space into dimensional space. A poster with minimal shadows or slight overlaps creates gentle depth without obvious three-dimensional effects. A website with soft shadows and subtle size variations creates depth that feels refined rather than exaggerated. The subtlety often feels more sophisticated than dramatic depth, the dimensionality present but not announced. Subtle depth invites closer looking, rewarding attention with discovered layers. It creates sophistication through restraint, suggesting space without showing off. The gentle dimensionality feels elegant, adding visual interest without creating distraction. The white room empties, one chair, otherwise bare. Simplicity supports rest. The reduced elements require less processing, less effort, less mental energy. The eye scans quickly, registers the simple scene, and relaxes. A poster stripped to essentials, one image, one line of text, generous white space provides visual rest. A website with minimal elements and generous spacing creates calm, the simplicity reducing cognitive load. Simplicity is not poverty, but intentional reduction, removing everything except what's necessary. The restraint creates spaciousness and clarity, making what remains more significant through its singularity. The rest comes from this reduction. Fewer elements mean less to process, less to organize, less to understand. The mind can settle into simplicity, finding peace in the lack of visual demands. The white room breathes in its emptiness, boundaries defining without constraining, layers suggesting dimension, simplicity offering sanctuary, scale and familiarity. A miniature table appears in the white room, tiny enough to hold in one hand. Scale affects perception. The same table that previously seemed solid and permanent now feels like a toy, delicate and temporary. Scale transforms meaning, changing how objects are understood and felt. A poster with an image of a small object reproduced at enormous size creates drama. The scale shift making the familiar strange. A website with varied element sizes creates hierarchy and emphasis through scale alone. The perception changes because scale provides context. Something small surrounded by large elements reads differently than the same small element surrounded by other small elements. Scale is always relative, always contextual, its meaning emerging from comparison rather than absolute measurement. The shift in scale creates shift in perception, the same element reading entirely differently at different sizes. The miniature table enlarges, growing until it fills the white room's view. Large elements feel closer. The increased size creates the impression of proximity, the object looming as though approaching. This principle comes from real-world experience. Objects appear larger as they get closer. A poster with a large image creates intimacy, the scale suggesting the viewer is close to the subject. A website with oversized typography creates immediacy, the text feeling present and urgent. The closeness created by scale affects emotional response. Large elements feel more important, more immediate, more demanding of attention. They occupy more visual space, and thus claim more mental space. their size suggesting significance beyond their actual content. The table shrinks back to miniature size. Small elements feel distant. The reduced scale suggests remoteness, the object appearing far away or unimportant. A poster with a small image surrounded by white space can create the sense of distance or isolation, the tiny element receding. A website with small text suggests subordinate information, the scale indicating lesser importance. Small elements require closer attention. The viewer must lean in, focus more carefully, work harder to perceive detail. This effort can create intimacy of a different kind than large elements create the intimacy of something precious, something that rewards close examination. But the overall feeling is one of distance, of remoteness, of separation between viewer and element. Two cubes appear in the white room, one twice as wide as the other. Proportion describes size, relationships. The 2-to-1 ratio between the cubes creates a specific relationship, a harmony based on their relative sizes. Proportion is always relational, always about comparison rather than absolute measurement. A poster with elements sized in proportional relationships feels harmonious, the ratios creating mathematical relationships even if not consciously perceived. A website with proportional sizing throughout creates consistency, elements relating to each other through shared ratios. The classical proportions, golden ratio, root rectangles, simple ratios, like 2-to-3, feel particularly harmonious, perhaps because they appear frequently in nature. But any consistent proportional system creates unity, the relationships between sizes binding the composition into a coherent whole. The two cubes adjust to a golden ratio relationship. One, approximately, 1.618 times the size of the other. Harmonious proportions feel balanced. The ratio creates a relationship that feels resolved, complete, satisfying. The balance comes not from equality, but from a specific kind of inequality, a mathematical relationship that has been recognized as pleasing across cultures and time periods. A poster with text blocks and images sized according to harmonious proportions feels naturally balanced, the sizing creating innate equilibrium. A website with proportional relationships throughout feels cohesive and pleasant, even when the viewer doesn't understand why. The harmony comes from relationships that somehow feel right, ratios that satisfy at a level below conscious recognition. These proportions create balance through mathematics, through ratios that have been found beautiful throughout human history. The same cube appears 5 times in the white room. Repetition creates familiarity. After seeing the cube once, twice, 3 times, it becomes known. The repeated element no longer surprises, is expected, recognized, familiar. A poster with repeated visual elements creates a vocabulary, a set of known forms that appear throughout. A website with consistent button styles, recurring iconography, and repeated patterns creates familiarity that makes navigation intuitive. The user learns the visual language through repetition, each new encounter reinforcing recognition. Familiarity reduces cognitive load. Familiar elements process faster than novel ones, recognition requiring less effort than initial comprehension. The repetition transforms strange into known, creating comfort through recurrence. The 5th cube appears, and the eye barely notices, having processed the same form 4 times already. Familiarity reduces effort. Recognition is easier than interpretation, pattern matching faster than analysis. A poster with recurring elements processes quickly because the viewer learns the pattern early and applies it throughout. A website with consistent design patterns requires less mental effort because users recognize repeated elements immediately. The reduced effort makes the experience smoother, removing friction from perception. Familiar elements fade into the background, not because they're unimportant, but because they're understood, freeing attention for novel elements that require active processing. The efficiency of familiarity makes compositions with repeated elements easier to navigate and more comfortable to experience than those where every element is unique and demands fresh interpretation. Every cube that appears in the White Room looks identical to the others, perfectly consistent. Consistency supports trust. The reliability of the repetition creates confidence that what's been true will remain true, that patterns will hold, that the system can be depended upon. A poster with consistent typography throughout feels professional and trustworthy, the attention to consistency suggesting care and expertise. A website with consistent interaction patterns creates trust that the site works as expected, that clicking similar elements will produce similar results. The consistency communicates intentionality. This is not accidental, but designed, not chaotic, but systematic. Trust builds through reliability, and visual consistency creates reliability. The predictable recurrence of elements establishing a dependable system. The White Room rearranges subtly closer spacing, softer edges, warmer light. Layout choices influence comfort. The shifts in arrangement affect how the space feels, whether it welcomes or repels, whether it invites lingering or encourages quick exit. Every decision about spacing, alignment, proportion, contrast affects the viewer's comfort level, their willingness to engage, their ability to process information. A poster with generous spacing and clear hierarchy creates comfort, making information accessible. A website with logical organization and intuitive navigation creates comfort, reducing friction and confusion. The comfort is often invisible when present. It's simply the absence of discomfort, the lack of barriers or obstacles. Layout creates comfort by removing reasons for discomfort, by anticipating needs and meeting them before they become frustrations. The changes to the White Room are almost imperceptible, a few inches of adjustment here, a slight softening there. Comfort can be subtle. Small improvements in spacing, minor adjustments to proportion, gentle refinements of alignment. These create comfort without drawing attention to themselves. A poster with slightly improved margins feels better without the viewer knowing why. A website with carefully tuned spacing creates ease without the user consciously recognizing the care involved. Subtle comfort is the best comfort, operating beneath awareness to smooth the experience. It never announces itself, never draws attention to its own cleverness. It simply makes everything feel right, makes engagement feel natural, makes the composition feel like it was inevitable rather than designed. The subtlety ensures the focus remains on content rather than shifting to the container. The White Room settles into its refined state, scale creating emphasis, proportion establishing harmony, repetition building familiarity, every subtle choice contributing to an atmosphere of ease. The White Room returns to its simplest state. White walls, white floor, one chair. Composition does not require complexity. Even this minimal arrangement is composed, the chair's position relative to walls and space constituting compositional decisions. Simplicity can demonstrate compositional skill as clearly as complexity does, perhaps more clearly by removing everything that might distract from fundamental relationships. A poster with one element perfectly placed shows compositional understanding. A website with minimal elements arranged with precision demonstrates compositional control. Complexity sometimes masks poor composition, the density of elements hiding weak relationships. Simplicity exposes composition, making every decision visible. The chair's placement matters more when nothing else competes for attention. Composition exists at all levels of complexity, from the simplest to the most elaborate, the principles applying equally whether there's one element or 100. The white room contains only what's necessary, and nothing more. Fewer elements can feel intentional. The restraint suggests careful selection, deliberate choice about what deserves inclusion. Everything present earns its place, and everything absent was consciously excluded. A poster with minimal elements feels designed rather than empty, the reduction reading as sophistication. A website with only essential elements feels focused and purposeful, the lack of clutter suggesting clear priorities. The intentionality comes from the sense that more could have been included but wasn't, that the simplicity resulted from editing rather than poverty. This is different from merely empty composition. Intentional simplicity shows evidence of decisions, of things deliberately left out to strengthen what remains. The fewer elements carry more weight, each one significant, because nothing dilutes its presence. The white room shifts over time, the chair moving incrementally as someone observes which positions work better. Layout evolves through observation. Composition improves through seeing what works and what doesn't, testing arrangements and learning from results. The process is iterative: try, observe, adjust, try again. A poster goes through multiple layouts before finding the right arrangement, each version revealing problems and suggesting solutions. A website evolves through user observation, analytics revealing which layouts serve better. The evolution comes from attention, from actually looking at what's been created and assessing honestly whether it works. Some arrangements feel right immediately, but most require refinement, the composition improving through successive iterations, guided by careful observation. The final layout contains all the learning from previous versions, each abandoned arrangement contributing knowledge to what finally works. The white room's arrangement follows several compositional principles, but violates others, yet it works. Rules describe patterns, not requirements. The principles of composition describe what often works, what tends to succeed, but they're observations rather than laws. A poster might break alignment rules and still succeed through other means. A website might violate spacing conventions and create something innovative. The rules provide starting points and guardrails, but they're not absolute. What matters is whether the composition works for its purpose, achieves its goals, serves its audience. Sometimes breaking rules creates exactly the tension or emphasis needed. The rules describe common patterns that work reliably, making them valuable guides, but they're servants to the goals of the composition, not masters to be obeyed regardless of context. Understanding rules thoroughly makes it possible to know when to break them and why. The person arranging the white room doesn't consciously consider grid systems or golden ratios, yet places everything well. Intuition often guides good composition. After enough exposure to well-composed work, principles internalize, becoming instinctive rather than analytical. The composer feels when something is right without articulating rules. A poster designer positions elements based on how they feel rather than measuring exactly. A website developer adjusts spacing by eye, trusting visual judgment. The intuition draws on accumulated experience with what works, pattern recognition operating below conscious thought. This doesn't mean rules are unnecessary, they build the foundation that intuition later builds upon. But eventually, good composition can flow naturally, emerging from trained instinct rather than deliberate application of principles. The best composition often combines both intuition for initial arrangement, analysis for refinement. In the White Room, the empty floor matters as much as the furniture. Space is as meaningful as content. The emptiness serves purpose, creates meaning, performs functions as important as the objects themselves. A poster's white space contributes as much to communication as its text and images. A website's padding and margins are as crucial as its content blocks. The space breathes, separates, emphasizes, organizes. It's not merely what's left over after placing content, but an active participant in the composition. The ratio of space to content determines character. More space creates elegance and calm. Less space creates density and energy. The distribution of space affects hierarchy and flow. Space provides the silence between notes, the pauses between words, essential for meaning. Without space, content suffocates. With space, content lives. The White Room's arrangement draws attention gently to one spot without forcing or demanding. Layout can support quiet focus. The composition guides without shouting, suggests without commanding, creating conditions where attention naturally settles where intended. A poster with clear but gentle hierarchy allows focus without aggressive emphasis. A website with thoughtful organization helps users find what they need without manipulative design tricks. The quiet focus feels respectful of viewer agency, offering guidance while leaving room for choice. It doesn't grab attention violently, but earns it through good arrangement. The focus emerges from relationships, clear hierarchy, logical flow, intentional emphasis, rather than from screaming for attention. This creates a quality of calm engagement, attention given willingly rather than captured forcefully. After time in the White Room, the arrangement becomes invisible, attention shifting to activities rather than the space itself. Composition can fade into the background. The best composition often goes unnoticed, succeeding by not calling attention to itself. The structure supports without intruding, organizes without announcing. A poster with excellent composition communicates its content without the viewer noticing the layout. A website with great structure helps users accomplish goals without awareness of the design enabling their success. The invisibility marks excellence composition so well suited to its purpose that it disappears, leaving only the smooth experience it creates. Poor composition announces itself through friction, through places where things don't quite work. Good composition disappears into effectiveness, the structure melting away to leave only the content it was meant to support. The White Room's organization registers as a general sense of rightness rather than as specific awareness of principles being applied. Sometimes structure is felt, not seen. The viewer senses order without identifying what creates it, experiences coherence without analyzing the system. A poster feels organized even if the viewer can't articulate the grid underlying it. A website feels intuitive even if the user doesn't consciously recognize the consistent spacing or clear hierarchy. The structure operates at a level below conscious perception, its effects felt as general impressions. This feels balanced, this feels clear, this feels intentional, rather than seen as specific techniques. This felt structure is often the most effective kind, creating experience without creating awareness of mechanism. The composition succeeds when viewers respond to its effects rather than noticing its methods. The room settles into stillness, its elements arranged, its spaces allocated, its relationships established. Sometimes the layout simply holds everything in place. The composition's job is complete when elements sit in positions that work, when relationships support rather than conflict, when the whole functions as intended. The layout becomes the stable container within which content lives, the framework that makes everything else possible. It holds without constraining, supports without interfering, organizes without imposing. The furniture rests where it belongs. The space breathes around it. The composition resolves into quiet rightness, structure, and content settling into equilibrium. The layout does what layout is meant to do. It arranges elements within space, creating order from potential chaos, making possible the communication or beauty or function the composition serves. And then, its work complete, it fades into the background, holding everything gently in place. The white room exists in perfect stillness now. Every element has found its place. The chair, the table, the lamp, the empty spaces between. They all rest in quiet arrangement. The composition breathes with the rhythm of its own internal logic, structure, and space working together in silent partnership. What began as separate objects scattered across a floor has become something whole, something coherent, a system of relationships that needs no explanation because it simply is. Layout and composition operate like this always, whether noticed or not. They arrange, they organize, they create meaning through position and proximity, through contrast and harmony, through presence and absence. They work in magazines and on screens, in galleries and on streets, wherever elements occupy space together and must somehow make sense. The principles remain constant even as applications vary infinitely balance, seeking equilibrium, hierarchy, guiding attention, space allowing breath, structure supporting clarity. The white room will change again, as all compositions do. Elements will shift, new objects will appear, relationships will reorganize. But the underlying truths persist, patient and reliable, waiting to be discovered again in each new arrangement. The work of composition continues quietly, holding everything in place, creating order, making possible all that appears within its gentle, invisible embrace. Thank you for visiting Sleepy Time Design.